Welcome to Uncovered, the Bible as historical document. You probably know the Bible as a religious book. Maybe you even own one or read one. But at its core, it is a collection of ancient primary manuscripts. In this show, we will examine the Bible from the perspective of a historian to examine its historicity and manuscript strength, to see if we can uncover why the founders of the United States thought this book held value for the construction of our civic system. Our host is history professor and theologian Dr. Carl Kriesman. Joining Carl is Matthew Porter, a writer, director, and creative executive.
Hey, Matthew.
Hey, Carl.
Man, we are here, buddy.
We are here. Oh, listen, Dr. Carl. Did I hear that? I know I heard it correctly, Doctor.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Does that mean you could check out this rash now for
I
me?
can't. No, I can't help
doc-
you. Not that kind of doctor. Don't ask me to help on a plane. I'll point to my wife, who's a nurse. Finished. Our journey with Unmoored was all connected to research that I had been doing for the doctorate. And completed all that.
That's that's quite a mountain to climb.
Thank you, sir. Flew all the way to Portland and got an official, what they call the hooding ceremony. So you kneel down. It's almost like they needed to bring a sword out and do some tapping on the sword. But
that's great.
They put a cool, little academic thing on you, and you get to wear a cool hat. I like my hat.
Nice.
In fact, when I spoke after I came back and I had a talk, I volunteer at a local senior living center with every month to do historical talks, and they've been great and supportive the whole 3 years. I've been all pumped. So I wore all my regalia the first time in, so they were all excited about it.
I like it.
Yeah. So we are off on a new journey, Uncovered the Bible as historical document. And we are going to be spending some time together and looking. And this is episode 1. So kind of want to set the stage, kind of set out what the parameters are, where we're going to go, give you an overview in the process. I know the word Bible might freak some people out, but we're going to tie it into where we were in the last episode or the podcast itself. Spend some time kind of helping us kind of work our way from where that episode left off forward. And where the episode left off was generally an idea of, for the founders, there had to be, there was several things that were part of the success of their attempt. And of course, remember with Unmoored, I'm gonna have a hard time getting these unwords back and forth.
This might have been a bad idea.
Yeah. For Unmoored, the point was, and we started with episode 1 there and 2 a little bit, was clearly when you look at the metrics, something's gone wrong with the country.
Yeah.
It's not one person. It's not one political party. It's that all the metrics show a lack of flourishing in a way that's scary. And so you're going, oh my gosh, what is happening to the country? And so then what we did in Unmoored was say, well, we've lost touch with our historical knowledge. Let's go backwards. And let's examine all the different kind of places and pieces of the puzzle. I told you I've been speaking publicly. I do that a lot. When I've explained this, a new analogy that I've used that I really have latched onto is the idea of a recipe. So you like to eat like I do?
Yeah, I usually try to keep the food metaphors till after lunch, which fortunately, so carry on.
We're good here. So imagine that you or your lovely wife had a recipe that stemmed all the way back to your great-great-grandmother.
Okay.
So it's been made.
Classic.
Your mom made it.
Yep.
Your mom learned it from her grandmother.
Yep.
Your mom taught you. And your mom and you, this could be a meal, it could be a main dish, it could be a dessert, but you've made it so many times, you know it cold.
Yep.
You can just make it.
In your sleep.
Yep. And suddenly, in the past several times you've made it, it doesn't taste right. In fact, it tastes terrible. Now, if you were saying, and I've always made this, I don't know what's going on. This is the recipe, right? What would be the first logical thing to do?
I would put on my investigator hat and let's talk about the ingredients. Let's just go one by one.
You'd have to get the recipe card out.
You have to get the recipe.
There you go. So you've got it.
Figure out where we went off the rails.
Your mom wrote it. Maybe your mom gave you the copy that her grandmother gave you.
Yep.
But you'd say, okay, hang on. I was making it in essence, blind because I've made it so many times.
Yeah.
But I need to double check what I've done compared to the recipe.
Yeah.
Now, maybe when you do that, you'll figure out you've made everything the same. And so then now you have to do some more investigating because maybe the ingredients haven't changed, but what she called butter and what you call butter now are totally different. All kinds of things could come up in that. But the point was with Unmoored, your first stop should be, let's get the recipe card out.
Yeah.
Let's make sure I haven't left anything out.
Find the plumb line of this thing. Yeah.
So what we discovered was for the founders, they had a clear ingredient and concept that we called the moral virtue foundation that was necessary. And that moral virtue foundation was something that was a combination between Christianity, but also what, the idea of the Enlightenment. So like, for instance, in the Declaration, it talks about Jefferson and Adams and Franklin wrote, that the laws of nature, but also the laws, of nature's God. So that we found as we worked our way through it, there's this whole premise that we could uncover and find out what had happened in the investigation. So that all led us to this need for the recipe, and for the founders, a vital ingredient of the recipe was Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah, and if it was a matter of opinion that mattered, the hundreds of years since, I think, would bear out the fact that there was something unique about this. And if there's something unique, it certainly merits investigation to kind of find out, what is it? What is this idea that changed history so dramatically, so quickly?
Exactly. Back to the recipe. So I don't cook anything with lard. It sounds gross to me.
I don't even know. Where do you buy it?
I don't think you could buy lard. But if I found on the recipe from my great-great-grandmother that she had used lard in the making of this recipe, and now I was making it and it didn't taste like I remembered it, like my mom had made it, like I had made it successfully, and now for the past several attempts it was terrible, and I go, oh wait, she was using lard, I've replaced that with something else, I need to go back to find some lard and at least try it once with the lard. And that's kind of this viewpoint here of, for the founders, it was Christianity.
Right.
Now, before we go deeper into Uncovered, I do want to make sure everybody gets this idea of a moral virtue foundation. So we talked about that a lot. Can you give a recap? Do you remember, moral virtue foundation, like what that means and what I was getting at with that?
Well, we talk about common values. I think of it along the lines of, if somebody was a really eloquent person, but they don't speak the same language as somebody around them, you've got to have a common currency of some kind for this to work. And I think among many things, that's at least what Christianity has done for the founders and created kind of a framework for us to develop our civilization and culture on.
And they were working that into this concept of governance. So governance of the people, as opposed to governance of someone other than the people, which is the normative state.
Right.
It's almost, and this really ticks some people off as an analogy, but it's almost parental, right? The normative state is mommy or daddy solve everything. And when you're a mommy and daddy of kids, even kids who maybe are 18, 19, or 20, you don't really ask their opinion. Right. This is what's happening.
Right. If it's a dictator or a king, same idea. It's the pyramid kind of action.
Right.
And that's I think an unassailable statement for most of history.
Correct.
That's the way it's gone.
Exactly. And so founders were saying, wait a minute, we think the people collectively can make, in essence, group decisions. So we're going to structure government and we'll have elected people, but they're not mommy or daddy. They're not there to manage things. They're us. And so that's the idea of a common moral virtue foundation, to sustain that, because without there being the common aspect, then the founders believed, well, you wouldn't be able to pull off the necessary interaction required to make group decisions about a whole variety of different rules of the road for the society. Like, what are we going to buy? How fast will we drive? Are we going to go to war with someone? All those things should be our decision. And to be able to make that decision, there has to be a common moral virtue foundation. And so that's as the founders saw it, they saw that as Christianity. Now, to be clear, it wasn't the only part. It wasn't the only ingredient of our successful government. And note, I'm not saying here that we said this last season, but I'm not saying there must be an embracing of Christianity or that Christianity was the sole factor in the whole process. But I am saying that it was Christianity. So again, if we're trying to review the recipe, then we need to look at this Christian thing. All right. So we're not trying to do a religious podcast. We aren't going to look and contend for the matters of faith within Christianity. Like, what we are going to do is examine the historicity of Christianity.
And for those of us that don't have a doctor in front of their name, historicity, I know, obviously.
Yeah. Okay.
As far as you know,
I could make you quote it.
What is historicity? Don't do that.
No. It's a word I love. I use it often, but it is fair. So, from the dictionary, the quality of being a real and important part of history and not a myth or a legend.
Okay, straightforward.
Yep. Something or someone is actually real. It actually happened and not fiction. Or to say it the other way around, if I tell you of someone like Julius Caesar, or I tell you of the Battle of Granicus River, or if I tell you of the building of the temple in Jerusalem, those are historical moments that you could say, I need to examine to find out the historicity of that. Was there really a Julius Caesar? Was there really a battle at Granicus River? Was there really a city called Jerusalem, and then B, a temple built in that place?
George Washington chopping down the cherry tree.
Exactly.
It's historical in the sense that it's a story that's been passed down.
Correct.
But it would not pass a historicity test in the sense that it didn't actually transpire.
Exactly. So to do that, one has to examine the evidence of whatever it is we're talking about.
Yes.
Was there a man named George Washington? Let's go find the evidence of that. Then do we know of him, anything about him as a kid? And then we find things, we begin looking for apple trees.
And that path would be the same no matter what you're examining.
Exactly.
If we wanted to lost city of El Dorado, okay, there's a process you would follow to determine the historicity of that. And that kind of established scholarly academic step-by-step is the same path we're going to go down for this.
Exactly. And we're going to look at some non-Bible events probably in the next episode to kind of really play that out, to really see that picture. Because I don't want you to just have to accept my word for it. I want to say, let's talk about this, and then I'll show you the research that we have. We're historians and what historians do. So here's what we're going to do, just so everybody knows. I want to just kind of give you this overview. We're going to, again, next episode, we're going to talk about what is history, what is it historians do, and how do they do that. That will lead us into a discussion about manuscripts. If you know the Bible, most of you say, yeah, it's this book I know of. I've become very adamant about it's a terrible word to call it a book. It's really more of a library of 66 ancient manuscripts dating roughly 1,900 years to 3,000 years back. And so it's all contained in one nice handy folder for us. So we're going to look at what it is to be called a manuscript, what the manuscripts tell us, how do we know their validity and historicity. Then we're going to look at the entirety of the book. So I just mentioned that there's this thing, there's 66 in most Christian Bibles. There's obviously different ways that is broken up, and there's different numbers in some Christian Bibles. And so we're going to talk about how did those get chosen. And then we're going to dive a little deeper into an examination of the text itself. So not a Bible study. Again, if you're not a Christian, please stay with me. But it is a historical look at the words on the page. You know, are we sure those are the right words?
And I think this would be a good point to ask this question regarding the title of historian. So as an example, if I were to say somebody's a lawyer, there's a process they went through to learn about being a lawyer.
Yep.
They passed a test, and some kind of governing authority said, this guy, this gal is a lawyer. Is there a parallel to that with the title of historian, or is it a different situation? And if it's different, then how do we arrive at you being a historian?
That's a good question. It's one I personally have wrestled with. And so you graciously mentioned having finished my doctorate. My doctorate was a doctorate of ministry in the field of semiotics, church and culture. why it mattered to me, well, one, because of who the lead professor was, who's someone I've followed their research and writing for 20 years. And so I get a chance to study with a hero was very, very cool. Yeah. But it mattered because the idea of semiotics is into the field of communication. So as a professor, it's a thing I do. But I think it's a very fair question. And there's been many times when I have not used the term historian. So it'd be fair for someone whose doctorate was in history to say, wait a minute, you're not a historian. I was recently listening to Adam Savage. You remember Adam Savage from Mythbusters?
Yeah. Great show.
Yeah, my family, we used to love watching that. He has a YouTube channel. It's called Tested, I believe. I recommend it to you. Go find it on YouTube and follow along. And he'll do all kinds of very cool things in that, not so much the Mythbusters field, but in the maker field and in sci-fi and a bunch of cool stuff that he does like that. And sometimes he will answer questions from his fans and then we'll riff on it for a while. And so he recently did. He answered a question of whether he considered himself a scientist or an engineer. And he first admitted that he does not have a degree in either field. Now, I have a degree in history. It's just not a PhD. And if you know Mythbusters from the Discovery Channel, then you know he and his co-host, Jamie Heineman, they did both scientific experimentation and engineering in the various builds and creations. And I'll pause here for a second and say, if you're a listener and you've never seen an episode of Mythbusters, do yourself a favor. In fact, pause the podcast, go away, come back in an hour, because it was so much fun. It was into science, it was engineering, it was critical thinking, it was logic. I just loved all about it. So now I'm going to quote. So Adam said this, quote, "My journey on Mythbusters was one of coming to understand that I am a scientist and I am an engineer." And he was kind of adamant about it. Now, he noted that saying such could annoy other people who have the actual academic degree in the field. But his point was, as a practitioner and as someone who spent now, I think, a couple of decades in the field, he has accomplished. So there can be a distinction between the paper appropriate academic criteria to say I'm such and such.
Yeah.
So I have a degree in history. It's a master's degree. My second master's degree was in theology, but it also involved a lot of history at that point. And I told you my recent doctorate is in semiotics. So there could be some who would take umbrage at me saying I'm a historian. But I did invest 3 long years in the doctorate, hundreds of hours of study, research, reading hundreds of books. And if you know me, you know that I typically will introduce myself as a professor. And there's a differentiation in that title, which I am aware of. However, in England, the title professor is like the top academic rank. That's not here in the United States, and we're not in England, but I look at that as, when I say professor, it's not a throwaway title. It's acknowledging in the same realm of some of my other heroes, and I know I'm not as smart as these guys, but C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, these guys were professors. And that's kind of my aim. But I am a professor of history. So I acknowledge that I'm someone who stands on the shoulders of giants, but my contribution is in the telling of the research of these giants. I make complex and complicated and sometimes esoteric ideas understandable according to my students. I take the research of other historians and communicate it to others. Still, I do my own research. I'm not really an AI person, so I don't let AI do my research for me. One day, maybe I will. And I come to my own conclusions based on research. So I'm a guy who helps communicate the information. And so as I look at this podcast, I know how we, historians, do our work in the field of history. I know how we come to final conclusions, whether we can or cannot trust the evidence, and then how we construct our understanding of like this historical person or moment and kind of building and examining the evidence. And so that's something I feel very confident about doing. And in general, if you think about it, it's difficult to construct a narrative at 100% full replication. I mean, obviously, if you're going to tell the story of your past 24 hours, it would take you 24 hours. And so we don't ever have 100% replication. Right. We have instead the idea of how can I best tell an accurate and true narrative on the evidence that I have, and that's what historians do. So we're building a correct or proper narrative about a certain person or place or event, and that's what historians do, and that's something I feel very confident about doing.
Yeah. And again, in this first episode, and kind of just setting the table about what we're going to talk about and why, there's a kind of a central word that we explored in the Unmoored podcast that I think would still be relevant here, which is flourishing. I love words, and the best words I think really are like a whole meal into themselves, and that's one of them. Flourishing. If you want to talk about human beings prospering and living at their fullest, that captures that for me. That crystallizes that, and I think that factors in here as well, and might relate to some statistics that you had talked about earlier.
Yeah, I'm with you. One of the things that actually at the beginning of my research, so back in 2022, and even before that, before there was an official pursuit of the doctorate, was, again, like I said, I'm looking around. I'll use the recipe analogy. What's coming out of the kitchen's terrible.
Yeah. Cook sucks.
I mean, my gosh. And if you know our political system, you know that's been both political parties. And I'm looking back now for 30 to 50 years, both political parties, different times and places. And I'm going, come on, this is terrible. And now I'm like, I'm one of the grown-ups. I need to pass something on better. I want the recipe to be right before I write it down on the card to give to my kids or grandkids. And this isn't cool. I don't want to just be floating along, not caring. So it's been something that's really driven me. I talk about it with my students. And so yeah, I want there to be flourishing. And so I'm constantly eyes open, ears open. And earlier this spring, a new report came out called the Global Flourishing Study. It's done by some heavy hitters, Harvard, Baylor, Gallup, and then there's a collective group called the Center for Open Science. Now, these guys have just released the first report of their longitudinal study that covered over 200,000 participants in 22 different countries over 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so this isn't like, we talked to 20 people who all happen to be from the same neighborhood.
Stopped at the mall food court.
Exactly. And they're you can search it online. So search Global I'll put a link in the show notes. And their first report is called What Contributes to a Well-Lived Life. It's fascinating, and there's lots and lots. There's deep research. They're continuing on. There's more to come. I can't wait to see what comes from it. So the first one, let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be better to live? Would there be better flourishing if you lived in a nation with a higher or lower GDP, so national gross domestic product? So economically successful place or not successful place?
And what was the?
Would it be more flourishing if you lived in the place with higher or lower?
I would rather live with the higher GDP and have the latitude to explore these top of Maslow's hierarchy questions.
Yeah.
Versus fighting tooth and nail for substance.
Exactly. So that is our go-to response. Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've said it before. I said last time, we're all addicted to ease and comfort. I'm like, yes, guilty as charged. I'm not giving up my air conditioning. Right? You know what the report showed?
What?
The report showed that the countries with the highest GDP per capita had the lowest composite flourishing. Wow. Lowest. One example, you can look at the chart. You don't believe me, that's fine. Tanzanians, one of the world's poorest countries, reported a greater sense of overall flourishing than do the affluent and stable Swedes. Sweden, not talking about us. Everybody's like, oh, Sweden's amazing. Sweden, I'm sure, is amazing.
Yeah.
But on this report, 5-year longitudinal study by top researchers and a whole host of questions and people that they were examining, right? It's amazing when you look at that.
I could see the math on that. If, I put it this way. If you ever talk to Jim Carrey, famous quote.
Yeah.
I wish everybody could become a millionaire, make $20 million a picture to realize that's not it.
Yep.
The advanced countries have gone all the way to the end of human success.
Yeah.
And bumped into the wall and went, shoot, something is still missing.
Yeah. So our point that we made in Unmoored, that we've become addicted to ease and comfort, that's another thing that I've had many times to say in public settings and speeches and talks. And one listener told me, they said, now that you said that, I can't unhear it.
Yeah.
And I look around at my own life, this person reported, as well as the people that I'm living near, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's right, once you see it, you get it. And again, I'm not turning off my air conditioning. I'm not saying anything like that, but I am saying if we say we want better flourishing, the answer is not more money. The answer is something else. And in fact, countries such as Indonesia Mexico, not high-income countries. Israel, somewhat of a high-income country, middle country, but also a country that's constantly at war.
Right.
So we wouldn't say, oh, it's very nice and peaceful and calm there. Higher degrees of human flourishing and the highest composite flourishing overall. And the reason why is because they have higher than average rates of marriage, community participation, higher rates of friendship, higher rates of religious belief and participation.
That's fascinating. And on a empirical gut level, you're like, that maths.
Well, and so now this hits home for me as a professor, but it hits home for you as a parent. Across the 22 countries that were included in this study, young people report the lowest levels of flourishing on average, while the oldest populations report the highest levels of flourishing. Now, remember, if you remember in Unmoored, we talked about this, particularly in episodes 1 to 3, but it came up other times. The research is that something's gone terribly wrong for our young people. Highest rates of suicide. Usually it's old people like me who kind of maybe are sad about the end of their life. Their kids have moved away. Maybe they're in greater isolation, who reports higher levels of flourishing. Historically, that's the case. And young people are typically always gung-ho and excited, and it's always awesome, and they're just rocking along. And instead, you've got this situation where it feels like, there's a problem happening for something for young people. And these patterns appear not only for happiness, but for search for meaning, character, relationships, and self-rated health. Younger respondents see themselves as doing as poorly or worse than the middle-aged.
Wow.
Now, the study cannot yet, and don't look for it in the research because they're not going there. This is good research. They're not just jumping to conclusions. They can't tell us exactly what's driving that shift, but the findings are consistent with the important work done by people like Gene Twenge and Jonathan Haidt, people that I've referenced in Unmoored and other places, other people who have sounded the alarm about the harmful effects of modern technology and modern life. These technologies, it's considered, are crowding out healthy face-to-face relationships, or other better activities that are in the natural world. So I ask you, Matthew, you're a dad. You have 4 kids. They're teenagers, most of them, right? What is your take on like that idea of harmful technologies or your children kind of moving in this space? Is there things that you do or things you?
It's boy, it is a big ball of yarn to untangle. We have always leaned towards. Well, put it this way, none of them on our social media.
Okay.
And we're just to the age with the oldest ones where we're entering the zone where they realize that's weird. That's out of phase with most of society. We still stand by it, but now we're getting to the age where, okay, we're going to have to introduce, not social media, but other technology in the sense of preparing you for the world. But as far as like entertainment and like screen time, we've noticed when there's just kind of an abundance of that, it affects kind of behavior. And I'd be happy to tell anybody anything we've learned, but in the scope of things, we are still sorting this out as we go very much.
Well, we're at such a young. We collectively, as a nation or as a culture or society, I've said for years that I think future historians, so we make it say to the year 2525, that they will be looking back and saying, okay, 2008, 9, and 10 is when the world changed. And maybe some other people would look at other dates, but nonetheless, it's in this early 21st century. And so it's right here at the year 2025. Obviously, it's very, very young in that time period, say from 2010. And so we still haven't sussed it all out. My kids were heading into their teen years about that. Well, roughly in that time period. And I look back now with some horror and some feelings of, oh my gosh, what did we do? And it's terrifying. But this question of flourishing is a central one. Now you're listening to me now, you guys. You may go, okay, wait, I thought, were we doing Uncovered about the Bible? So the research is public, and there's lots of organizations that are looking at the research. So there is another group that did their own study in which the study is called the State of the Bible Report. Now, they did a lot of stuff in that, which is not germane to this part that we're talking about. But in there, they triangulated to the Flourishing Report from Harvard. And in the Flourishing Report for Harvard, there are questions connected to participation, connected to religious identity and connected to the reading of like spiritual or holy, quote unquote, writings. And so they reported that according to the research from the Harvard study, quoting now, the more often people interact with the Bible, the higher their human flourishing scores. And then that connected to this idea of, well, how's more often? More often, experts say, is 4 times a week. So it's not just the throwaway of like once a month I read the Bible and I don't feel more flourishing. It's like, no, you have got to kind of dig into it 4 times a week kind of a thing. And according to the researchers, if you say, well, wait a minute, well, why? Why is that the case? Well, one is because the Bible helps provide meaning and purpose for life. And that's a key indicator about flourishing, that a person feels like they have a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And another one, this is amazing here. They show that humans who can forgive others are 2 full percentage points higher in overall flourishing score than those who cannot. And again, just so you know, in research, 2 percentage points is actually a lot.
Yeah.
So, well, the Bible teaches forgiveness as a core concept. I'm not saying it's the only thing that teaches forgiveness, but I'm just making this connection about flourishing. And then the researchers found that humans who report regular Bible readings also report having much less stress than other people who don't read the Bible. The average is about 30% less stress. Right? So my point is that what we want to do is we want to investigate the Bible for its validity in its evidence. But as we're doing it and we're tying it initially back to just this was part of the recipe, but now we're having researchers in the realm of flourishing saying attendance at religious services or greater Bible interaction is useful for the human flourishing.
And this is where if I was a skeptic or not a Christian or whatever, I would like, okay, you're backdoor doing all of this under the guise of academic objectivity or whatever to get me to get washed in the blood of the Lamb, and this would be a good point to address that. And you know, there's kind of, I think we'd have a reflexive thing to go, no, look, that's not the point of this. This is not, we don't care about you becoming Christian. That's not a truthful statement.
Yeah.
Putting all cards on the table, even though this is an academic process, everybody comes to every issue with a bias. We're clearly biased.
Yep.
I've staked out where I stand on this for good. So put that on the table. Second, yes, we do care about that issue. Those 2 disclaimers out of the way, the aim of this is to take an academic objective as best we can as human beings, examination of the Bible as a historical document, and to ask the questions that any skeptical, curious person would in determining whether or not we deem it as reliable purely in the context of historical documents.
Yeah, it's well said, man. It's well said. What I'm interested in, and this goes back, Matthew, to when I, in my very early 20s, was trying to discern my own position. Like you, I grew up in what we would call a family of faith. It's a family of Christians. My dad was a leader and then became a pastor later. And so the Bible and Christianity was all around me. So in my kind of paint on the wall, right? It was just there. It was part of living in my house. And like many people, by the age of 19 and 20, I was re-examining those things. I was going, hang on a second. I'm not sure that I really believe this thing. And for me, since that point, I would say what I've wanted to know is what's the real story of the world? Like, how's the world here? Why is the world here? What's the point of the world being here? What's the point of my place being in the world? And I mentioned in the last session of the original podcast that I was trying to speak also, because you and I had a couple of characters that we'd set up in that story. And then I said, at the last minute, let me introduce a third character. And it's that a person who goes, I either was a Christian or maybe was religious, and now I'm really disenchanted with that faith. I'm disenchanted. There's a lot of reasons. And there are a lot of reasons. If you look at a lot of things in the world, but certainly something like Christianity that would hold itself up as some holy and just and look how good it is, then you see people who fail miserably or they feel terribly at the thing in public. And then you maybe know of people who aren't in public, but your experiences with them. And it was one of what you would say, if that's Christianity, I ain't doing it because it was terrible. That person, and I wanted to speak to that person who, was maybe also like I at 20, re-examining, or the cool phrase now is deconstructing their faith. And what I said to that group at that time in episode 12 was I urged them to be brave enough to make the examination into the Christian faith, into the spiritual dimension, hunting for the real story of the world. And again, that's the thing that drives me, because I believe that there is a real story of the world. And if there is, then that story connects to purpose, both my own sense of purpose, but also the idea of the world being here for a purpose. And that's the thing that I really want us to spend our time in these episodes examining. And here's a way that I've been saying it. I don't know that it's perfect. I kind of will lean on G.K. Chesterton for this and his way of kind of getting there. And there's some books, I might even link one in the show notes, but this is the way I'm saying it now. There's a maker. All the evidence, both in science and otherwise, points to some force, if you would prefer, that is designing things and yet has chosen to design in beings that we call humans with free will. And maybe with my recipe analogy, I should say there's a chef.
There you go.
But there's an original and there's a first outside of time. It's a force that was able to step into time and step into the choice to create. And so the maker, and this being, the maker, created all things and placed these first humans into a garden paradise. But he had chosen, or it maybe, had chosen to express free will. It's actually a part of the divine spark in that the being wanted to mirror or to create kind of a reflection of itself, his self. And so the humans needed to have this ability to have choice at all times. And so they did. And then ultimately, the beings, the humans, were misled. And they contributed by the choice that they made. They basically wanted to follow their own rules for life rather than the rules of the garden maker, of the great maker in the process. So in punishment, the couple's cast out of that location. But they're cast out with a promise from the maker that somewhere in the future, a descendant from the woman would kill the force, the creature that created the fall, and there'd be a chance for reunion or redemption back into the garden. Okay. Rhett McLaughlin was recently on Alex O'Connor's podcast, Within Reason. You ever heard of those guys?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Alex O'Connor is an amazing person to listen to. We disagree on a lot, but a very thoughtful man, very thoughtful thinker, has engaged with a lot of Christian thinkers who I know, and I'm always like, I wish I could have the conversation with Alex, because it seems Rhett McLaughlin apparently is a YouTube personality, very popular. Apparently at one point his Christian faith was very important to him. And then he also is someone who's deconstructed and left, at least from what I can glean, the Christian faith, which is fine. But I guess he's popular enough that Alex had him on his podcast. And so they're having this conversation about why and what went on. And so McLaughlin at one point presents an idea that he says, quote, religion is very useful for the human, but it is man-made. In other words, McLaughlin is saying that what I just told you about the maker is false, that idea that as I'm saying it is something that's man-made. And I do like what he says here. So keep listening. I'm quoting him still. We created it, religion, because we needed it to some degree. for the ritual, for the community, for the sense of awe, these things that are essential to the human experience that I do think you can experience outside of religious community, but for most of history, religious communities have done that well. Well, so what I would say to McLaughlin is I think that he misses the evidence that I'm trying to present. And that's what we're going to be looking at. In other words, I just told you a nice little story and you say, oh, Carl's so cute with this little story. And it's great. Carl's a decent storyteller, so I hear you. However, the skeptic, whether Christian or not, could say, yeah, but I'm not sure I believe all that. And I understand that if you dig into the story I just told you, there's places where even more questions can emerge that deserve evidence that we won't get into on the scientific front and some other questions about that. I get that part. What I'm hoping in this podcast, though, is that this shows that the Bible is historically stable and actually helps us understand or produces the evidence for the true story that I just told you. And so when I say there's a true story, as a historian, one of the things that I'm constantly noticing is that there are echoes of evidence across the globe that come back to this story that I'm telling. So here's one example, right? When you look across all the planet and all the history, there's a remarkable consistency in that almost all people groups, in fact, I will say all people groups that I know of, all times, all cultures, all parts of the planet, different continents, all have a remarkable consistency in a belief in the spiritual, or what could be sometimes called the transcendental, right? So this belief in something there. But why? Why is that the case? In other words, we don't see a common thing like that necessarily in all areas of like clothing style or food choices or building style. You see remarkable creativity and difference connected to environment, to location. And yet all these people groups have some belief or connection with the spiritual. In other words, why wouldn't there be some people groups? I mean, statistically, if you think of a normal bell curve, maybe 20 or 30% who have no religion at all, no spiritual need, no spiritual hunger. It doesn't logically make sense for McLaughlin's point to be true that there needed to be a religious thing to express for this ritual community in the sense of awe. If he's right, and we created it and created religion, then again, you would find some that there would be none of that. But instead, when you look at the narrative of the earliest moments of our planet and you work all the way through all this historical story kind of working your way through, there is a line of descendants from those who at first knew of this story of the Maker. And earlier, McLaughlin in this interview, he noted that most people come to their faith through their parents. That's fair. Mm-hmm. He's correct, I think. But then think that through in the type of a people, right? So of a people group. All people groups have a parent. There's somewhere that we can trace back, certainly historically, if not, scientifically back and say, okay, this is where that people group began versus this other people group. It isn't logical to assume that all across the planet that each of the first parents felt some need to create religion for better human connection or to bind closer their family unless they actually knew of the Maker. And when you look at their stories, that's how it's described. It's different from the Bible's telling of creation, but the similarity is strong enough that you go, they're telling the same story. And I find that so compelling. And so we carry that forward then. The Makers, we're told, ultimately connects with a new couple. And we have names for them, historical names, Abram and Sarai. And this is told that he calls them out. Mm-hmm. Now, again, this is important also for us kind of pointing to the historicity of this activity. It's not like God, quote unquote, chose the Jews as if there were multiple cultures and multiple peoples that he's like, I like these guys better and screw the rest of you. Instead, what you have is God looking for a new couple that could take the place imperfectly of the first couple. And when you start looking, he says, I'm going to launch my rescue plan that I promised the first couple that would do the restoring. I'm going to launch it through you. Well, to what end? For all the peoples of the planet to find their way back to the garden, not for some group to somehow be, quote unquote, more special. And when you look at the language that he uses, and you have to go into the document, and we're not going to go all the way in on this part, but you can do it yourself. You find a lot of the same reflection of things he promised in the garden: protection, guidance, provision, direction, unique rules for living. And he gives these same promises of like, I will make you fruitful, I will multiply you, I'll give you a land, I'll give you a garden to supply you. You see him restating the initial kind of promise. And he says, this coming descendant, this savior person who's going to crush the evil force will come through your line. And if you trace it down, that's exactly what happens. But it gets even better. And this really takes us into the evidence that we're going to have to dig into. The Maker becomes human, lives among us, comes to earth to help the humans find a way to flourish. And so how do we know all that? Well, that's what we're going to be examining. Because if the Maker comes to earth, well, that would be a supernatural event. It would take this being, he, she, it, they, would have to demonstrate to us something extra human, superhuman, non-human. We would be looking for clues and evidence to say, is it just something they're telling us, or is there evidence to support that? What we're going to do is the search for that evidence and the investigation of that evidence. That's what this podcast is going to be all about.
And that is the path we will be on. And we hope you will join us. Carl, will you join us next?
I'll be here.
Thanks for joining us on Uncovered, the Bible as Historical Document. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. If you have questions or comments, drop an email to carl@carlkreisman.com. This episode was produced and edited by Carl Kreisman and recorded at the Winter Park Public Library. The Winter Park Library promotes the free and open exchange of ideas and does not attempt to control or take responsibility for any opinions that may be expressed in this podcast. Opinions expressed in this podcast do not constitute or imply an endorsement or a reflection of the library's policies or beliefs. Our theme music was written and performed by Kyle Williams. A big thank you to everyone who supports this show. And if you'd like to help, visit carlkreisman.com/uncovered.